Thanks, Adele. Yeah, we've got two really good speakers today. We have Mark Child and Priya Kanabar, and together they're going to be exploring the profound impact and celebrating apprenticeships have on our sector. They're going to be discussing how apprentices bring innovation, enthusiasm and a fresh perspective to the whole business, contributing to the overall success of the industry. And it will also give us a really good opportunity to gain insights, share experiences and celebrate all the achievements in the apprenticeships. A little bit about our speakers. Mark Child's got 30 years experience in apprenticeships. He's multi-award winning expert in qualification development, assessment and quality assurance. And he's very passionate about improving education and qualification opportunities for everyone, regardless of their age, identity, gender, sexuality or neurodiversity. Priya has worked as a babysitter, a childminder and a dance fitness teacher since 2013. She operates her business in the borough of Newham in East London, and her settings focus is very much around child-led planning, independent learning and a hands-on outdoor approach. Yoga, dance fitness and various educational trips are some of the teaching elements used in her creative-based setting. So without further ado, we will start with Mark. Over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Gail. Morning, everyone. I'm really pleased to be with you this morning to highlight the importance of apprenticeships in early years. As Gail said, I actually work at VTCT, so I'm heavily involved in the apprenticeships and qualifications that we actually offer as an awarding organisation. But in addition to my role as VTCT's Head of Stakeholder and Customer Engagement, I'm also the Specialist Lead and Advisor for our early years qualifications and apprenticeship standards. And over the past few years, I've sat on the Trailblazer groups for the development of the early years standards across all levels. And it's been my privilege to work with a number of large employers who really see the value of early years apprenticeships. However, I still think we've got a long way to go really in raising the profile of apprenticeships at all levels across the sector if we're going to be able to go anyway in addressing the current crisis around the recruitment and retention of staff in early years and meeting the targets for free childcare places that was recently announced by government. I'm acutely aware at the moment at this moment in time that there are a number of uncertainties around the early years sector, with nurseries closing their provision due to increasing costs and overheads. But outside of all of these challenges, I really think that employing an apprentice is a great way to add strength to your setting and one way to address your workforce needs. For me, an apprentice is like really having a blank canvas, and you're able to mould them to meet the values and ethos of your organisation. And I actually work with some large organisations such as Parenta and Busy Bees and Kids Planet, who are two of our largest employer groups, and they actually see the value of apprenticeships and actually do engage quite a lot with their apprenticeship programmes and their managers of service to move forwards and actually improve the quality of their delivery for the people and the children that they support. So hopefully by the end of today we will have convinced you that there is some value in apprentices, and certainly the work that Priya's been doing really will lend itself well to that proof. I've been working, as Gail said, in apprenticeships now for over 30 years, and I know there's still occasions when I hear the term you can go into care, childcare or hair, and that's still bantered around when I go into schools or I'm talking to careers advisors, because they just see that, you know, for those lower level learners who've got a lower skill set, the care, childcare or hair is probably the best career pathway for them to follow. And I have to say that really makes my blood boil, because when I hear this, because some of our best practitioners have started their career on a level 2 apprentice and are now owners of their own businesses or are in senior positions, having gained the necessary competence and further qualifications in order to progress and achieve what they, you know, want to do as part of their career choice. So obviously there's still a massive piece of work to do around promoting the positive value of apprenticeships and their links to ongoing career progression. We do an awful lot of promotion at VTCT around the importance and value of apprenticeships. And of course, we've just had National Apprenticeship Week. And again, we had quite a lot of young learners engage with us, looking at all of the career pathways available. And we actually had a real focus on early years and adult care this time around, because obviously there is a recruitment and retention crisis at this moment in time. And anything that we can do as an awarding organisation to address those needs, you know, we will actually try and take an active part. So really, from my point of view, as an awarding organisation, it's really important that we take ownership and start to promote apprenticeships all year round and really highlight those successful and outstanding learners who've made a difference to the sector by achieving their apprenticeship programmes. VTCT now, as part of my responsibility, is now going into schools to talk to teachers and young learners about the great benefits of being an apprentice. And certainly, as I said earlier, we're having a focus on early years and adult care at the moment because of the recruitment and retention crisis that we're currently facing. As I said, we're going to hear from Priya shortly about the work she's been doing in her business to support her apprentice. And as I've already had some insight into the work that she's doing, I have to say it's brilliant, and she'll talk a bit more about what she's doing after I've done my presentation. In terms of recruiting more apprentices, I think we need to do a number of things. Firstly, I think we need to invest in the quality much more. We need more employers to invest in apprentices and really understand what apprentices actually involve, because people tend to see it as additional work, when really, if you think about it, all of the induction, training and delivery of knowledge and understanding, all of the things that you do about getting people to work in the sector is actually married up with the apprenticeship programme. So really it shouldn't take a lot of work to engage with an apprentice and actually get them to do all of their knowledge, skills and behaviours training as part of your normal delivery in the nursing setting. I know, certainly having spoken to a number of employers recently, that they are really disengaged really with apprentices because they've been worried about some of the level 3 staff coming through, particularly around the grasp of pedagogy and their role as early years teachers. And I have to say, now that we've done the revision of the level 3 standard, there will be a much more increased focus on pedagogy and all of the things that people need to work effectively as a practitioner. And I'll touch a bit more on the revision of the standards as we go through the presentation. I think also we need to recruit more widely. When advertising for apprentices, we need to start considering recruiting both men and women. I know certainly the proportion of UK early years professionals who are male is really minuscule at the moment and has barely grown over the last 20 years. And I've been doing a piece of work with Busy Bees and Kids Planet nurseries, who are two of our VTCT large employer groups, to encourage more men into early years. And I have to say, we've been successful in some areas of the country, but in others it's still proving really difficult to recruit. And I'm now actually engaging with a men's focus group that's based in London to try and get more of their members involved in early years and try to persuade them to take up early years as a career, because it's really important that we do actually have, representation from male people in the nursery settings as well. I think also we need to secure more government and regulatory support. I mean, the future of early years apprentices could be brighter, I think, if government departments were to increase focus and shine a spotlight on early years careers. We also need Ofsted to highlight outstanding practice, both through their reporting and grading where an employer is championing apprenticeship programmes. And the government must also find a really, I think, an appropriate way to simplify the levy funding process for large employers, because there are large pots of levy funding there that large employers are tending not to use for apprenticeship programmes, and obviously government take that money back and it gets lost in the ether. And again, once people don't start to use that money, government become disengaged and they think, well, what's the point in investing in apprenticeship programmes if the employers are not going to take them up? So I think, from our own point of view as large early years employers, that we do make a conscious effort to spend the levy if it actually is made available to us. I think also we need to place an increased focus on social media by sharing apprenticeship vacancies on a number of platforms and show early years as a valuable career. I think we need to grow our own early years social media influences. It will rave about early years as a career. Just to give you an example, I'm currently doing a piece of work with the Association of Hairdressers and Holistic Therapists on a similar project to promote their fantastic career opportunities. And we're actually engaging with some real good influencers that are out there. So I think, in terms of the people that you employ, you might have some people within your setting who are, great on social media, might actually want to sing and, shout about career pathways in early years as a career option. So I think if we've got that opportunity, I think we really need to actively encourage that to happen. Obviously, if you meet one or two of those ideas, then obviously you need to think about where you're going to go with your apprentice. Well, as an awarding organisation, I think from our point of view, it's vitally important that in order to help apprentices to achieve their full potential, the employer shouldn't be totally dependent on the training providers such as Parenta to provide the necessary support and guidance to get a learner through an apprenticeship programme. I think it has to be a two-way partnership with both the training provider and the employer, really being involved in a robust induction process at the very start of the apprenticeship journey to ensure that the apprentice is aware of all the settings, policies, the needs of the setting and the needs of the family and children they're going to support moving forwards. And I think one way in which we can do this, and one way which would be achievable, is to provide the apprentice with a workplace mentor who will make their induction process much smoother for them and help them find their niche within the team. I have to say, all too often I see employers leaving the delivery of knowledge and understanding to the training provider. But from my point of view, it's really vital that the setting allocates the apprentice and mentor at the start of the process, who's an experienced practitioner with a sound understanding of how to support and guide that inexperienced team member to get them through their apprenticeship programme. I know certainly of some larger employers who I work with who've allocated a specialist staff coordinator position within their team, rather than relying on the manager of the service to take over all responsibility. I know that managers of service, tend to get bogged down with administrative duties and tend to be office space for a large amount of the time, and that's just the nature of the beast. That happens in a lot of organisations, but I think it's really difficult for managers, if that's the case, for them to get a real accurate grasp on what their teams are, their strengths and weaknesses, and what that apprenticeship really needs in terms of support to get them through their apprenticeship programme. So I think allocating a staff coordinator with a high level of autonomy can really ensure that the apprentices have access to instant advice when they need it. And this will really ensure that the decisions can be made with reassurance and are vital if the team is being established, certainly if it's a new setting that's been set up. I think certainly as the team develops and apprentice skill set starts to grow, I think it's really important that the people that they work alongside start to coach them in other areas of practice that sit outside the apprenticeship programme, and this will really help the apprentice begin to solve their own problems as well as take on additional responsibilities as their confidence grows. I think probably it's a bit like using scaffolding if you want to really reassure and support in an effective way to ensure that the apprentice develops at their own rate. We have the privilege of VTCT of working with Parenta as one of our approved centres who offer the early years standards. And along with Ofsted, we monitor them very closely in terms of capturing the learner journey from the enrolment process right through to the achievement of endpoint assessment. And it's very clear sometimes when we speak to learners as part of our internal audit process, whether or not that employer has been fully engaged with the training provider to support the learner through the training assessment process. I also see the difference at the endpoint assessment stage, and it's very clear where the learner has been fully supported by their employer, because the learner is confident in explaining all aspects of the settings, policies, procedures and routines, whereas those learners who really haven't had that amount of support tend to just explain things in a more generic way, and they provide little substance or rationale about what they're actually doing in practice, and this often results in them actually achieving a lower overall grade for their apprenticeship programme, which is a real shame, because obviously at level 3 they will have put 18 months of their time and energy into actually studying for that programme, and it's unfortunate when the employer doesn't take an active role in that delivery and really tries to champion all of the knowledge, skills and behaviours that learners actually achieved as they've been going through their apprenticeship programme. And I know certainly Priya has been doing an awful lot of work with her apprentice to try and give them the very best opportunity and the best possible outcomes as part of their apprenticeship that they're undertaking. Those of you on the webinar today who are actively involved in apprenticeships will know that the current early years standards at level 2 and 3 contain a diploma qualification in early years as the mandated part of the apprenticeship standard. Well, I have to say, folks, that's all about to change. And we're will be seeing the demise of qualifications in some standards as and when they come up for revision. Now, we've listened to employers over the past few months as we've started to revise standards, and certainly been the message that we've received from employers that they really don't want a qualification. They don't want that added burden of having to do a qualification alongside an apprenticeship standard. So we've taken the decision this time around to remove the level 3 diploma from the level 3 standard, which will go live in April. The reason why we've done this is so that we can place a larger emphasis on the knowledge and skills and behaviours that an early years practitioner at level 3 will require. And this really will give them an opportunity to have much more of an increased work focus on competency. So at the endpoint assessment stage, once the new standard goes live, there will be an observation of practice by an external assessor from the awarding organisation, together with a professional discussion that will really drill down into whether or not the learner has the necessary depth of knowledge and understanding to be able to work as an effective practitioner in a setting. It's also likely that we'll have a similar level 2 standard as and when it comes up for review. And I think we are due to review the level 2 standard in around about 18 months' time. So you'll possibly see that the level 2 qualification will also disappear. As I've said, the revised level 3 early years educator standard is due to go live in April 2024. And I'm currently working with Parenta and our other large approved centres to get their internal assessor and quality assurance teams ready for delivery. I know we're going to have a question and answer session and a wider discussion around apprenticeships at the end of the webinar. So for now, I'll hand you back to Adele, and just to say thank you for your time this morning. And I'm happy to answer any questions about the revision of standards and apprenticeship frameworks at the end of Priya's presentation. Okay, thanks, Gail.
Thanks, Mark.
Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here, not just to let you know the benefits of hiring an apprentice, but to celebrate my male apprentice, Jack, who has started with me last year in April. So he's nearly finished his level 2 and I couldn't be more proud. So let me give you a little intro as to what we do at Kids in Motion. So I've been childminding for just over 10 years now in the borough of Newham. We've had 2 out of 3 inspections rated as outstanding. And I've recently published a book in October called The Joys of Childminding. And in that book, I actually discuss the differences between hiring an apprentice versus a qualified person. So the reason I chose, and the reason I've always needed an assistant, is because there's always been a demand for childcare places, especially since COVID-19. There just aren't enough spaces. And because of the financial struggle and the anxiety around finances since COVID-19 and the first lockdown, I decided that I wanted to find an apprentice. So since I found Parenta, it's been absolutely smooth sailing. The reassurance and the support has been outstanding. It's been so much needed, especially for a childminder working alone. We don't have much support. It can get lonely. So having that support has been so essential. So Jack actually contributed to our second outstanding, which was only a few weeks ago, our Ofsted inspection. And the inspector was so impressed, she didn't even realise he was an apprentice. So hats off to Jack. And we worked really well as a team. It just went to show. So onwards and upwards, the success in partnership working, it's just been phenomenal. And I can't wait to see what the future holds. So let me go over how to find an apprentice and how I found Jack. So I'll definitely recommend visiting childcare exhibitions because you get to talk to people face to face. I spoke to Parenta, spoke to a few other training providers, and because we are a small setting and we offer flexibility, I needed someone reliable. The 16 hours minimum that Parenta offer, that Parenta say, sorry, that we have to give apprentices, and that worked perfectly for me. So you have to find the right match. So when I found them, they narrowed down the top candidates, which was the work cut out for me. I didn't have to do any of that. They did that. All I had to do was do a trial day, induction, and then do all the identity checks. And I was so happy with Jack that I took him on. So the training team since then have been in touch regularly, and just to check up, even after the first few weeks after I hired him, they've offered that reassurance. And if there's any problems, I know that I can go to them. So all I do is provide the support, provide a safe space, make sure he's not overworked, make sure he's not overwhelmed, make sure he's happy, and to share the responsibilities. That is really important, sharing the responsibilities, making him feel like he has big jobs. He has a big job role, he's an important part of the setting, and he shares everything and he gets involved with everything we do. So now I'm going to talk a bit about the difference between an apprentice and a qualified assistant. Now, I've always had a qualified assistant before I found my apprentice, and it's been easy in the sense that I haven't had to train them, they've already been qualified, but the problems I've faced are the wages, because the wages are higher and the national minimum wage goes up every year. There's a pressure to increase pay and to keep them on, because they will ask for, you know, more perks and more benefits. They will more than likely ask for more pay because they are older, they have, you know, more commitments, they have more to pay for. And they may only stay with you for a year, 6 months to a year. That's what I've heard as well. And then they may go on to change their job. And then they are also harder to source. So I was looking on platforms such as LinkedIn and Indeed, and I thought I'll find someone professional, but I was just looking for ages. It was about 6 months to a year. The past year I'd been looking before I found my apprentice. And to find someone who was flexible and someone who didn't have set times and set days and their set routine and children to pick up, etc., that was really, really difficult. So the good things about hiring an apprentice, and they definitely outweigh the benefits to hiring a qualified assistant. The courses, the training, is 95% funded. So that means I only pay the 5%, which is, you know, it's massively important, and it takes that stress away financially. There's an option of keeping them for a year, because the second year you have to pay them national minimum wage. So that's great to have that option, but if you're happy with them, you can keep them on. Long-term training opportunities. Now, because they have just started, you know, Jack started as level 2, everything's fresh, everything's new and exciting. They are still aspiring, passionate, they're young, so they are more flexible, and they're more likely to stay with you long-term. Also, there is such a huge demand for apprenticeship places. Now, originally, as I said, I went to Parenta and I wanted a qualified person, but they told me there's actually a shortage, so they couldn't find anyone qualified, which actually worked out for the better. And I'm really happy with my decision to go ahead with the apprentice. So the 3 components I find that are so important in building a really strong foundation and a successful pathway for the apprentice are the employer's professional expertise. And so I basically create a really outstanding, I demonstrate an outstanding practice, an outstanding setting, and make sure I teach to the highest of standards. I want to be a positive role model, and I want to teach him how to do things in the best way. The apprentice's fresh new perspective, which also helps me to evaluate my setting, and listening to them, giving them a voice and listening to their individual learning styles, just figuring that out and making sure that I teach him in the way that he learns effectively. Also, the training provider. Now, they offer so much support and development, the one-to-ones. It takes all the work, you know, away from me, so I can then focus on the practical aspects, like risk assessments, for example. So they address any concerns he has and they monitor his progress. So this is a really strong partnership between the 3. So I'm just going to summarize the long-term benefit. So it's just such an empowering feeling. I feel so empowered to be Jack's mentor. And because I'm a childminder, I'm the only person. It's not like a nursery setting where, you know, there are so many people who support him. There's only me. So to see him grow, how much he has grown and the skills he has picked up, how well he knows the children, his knowledge, you know, being able to manage multiple children's needs simultaneously, that takes years to learn, and he's already mastered that. So I couldn't be more proud. Leadership skills for both, because I obviously manage him. So that's leadership skills for me, and leadership skills in a new way, because I've always had a qualified person as an assistant, but having an apprentice is slightly different. And motivation to improve my setting. So it really helps having his perspective. It's new, it's fresh, and I can then improve. So I want to inspire him, I want to empower him, and I want to create a really strong foundation. It's such a boost of self-esteem for me. Definitely, it's so empowering having an apprentice, and I've had such a positive experience. I would definitely recommend hiring an apprentice if you are thinking about it. So my name's Priya. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Great, thank you so much, Priya. That's been great. And it's so refreshing to hear an employer who's really engaged, who lives and breathes, you know, the apprenticeship and what that actually means. Because as a training provider, and something that Mark was saying earlier, we work with a lot of settings, and you do see those apprentices who have that support with their mentor or with a manager, someone in the setting that really helps them, how quickly they progress, versus learners that don't have that engagement, where we don't see those employees on the reviews. And I was just saying, we had a meeting beforehand. It's almost like that fundamental understanding isn't there of what the skills, knowledge and behaviour, the key components that makes up a standard, actually it is actually just there. Everyday objectives that you would set for any staff member within your setting, and how you can train and support that individual. So it's nothing additional. If you take on anyone, you still need to train them to do those skills, knowledge and behaviour to be able to be a successful educator within your setting. So it's exactly the same way, but it's not over and above. So set your tasks, set your objectives for any staff member, and that's what your objectives are for your apprenticeship. Mark, over to you. I know that obviously with VTCT and Skills First, you guys deal with a lot of other providers. But the biggest challenge obviously is time within the earlier sector. And I know you guys deal with health and social care and beauty as well. But for us, it's the time factor. What would you say is your advice for settings that to actually make that time? You know, what do you think is the benefit of actually making the time to actually just, like I said, not over and above, but actually make that as part of the encompassing journey?
Yeah, I think you've already mentioned before, Adele, you know, the fact is that the apprenticeship standards are written in such a way that the knowledge and skills and behaviours should automatically fall out of what you do with that learner on a day-to-day basis, because you've got a really structured induction process for any new worker coming into your setting, and you align it to the relevant level of the standard. Automatically, that piece of work will fall out of it. You know, Priya's done a fantastic job with Jack, her apprentice, in actually trying to map the KSBs to what she actually does in practice. And I think if more employers were to engage and to take responsibility for that, I think it would actually make that learner journey much more positive for them. Because, you know, we do have employers that are approved centres of ours who do a fantastic job with their learners. From day one, they have structured induction process, initial assessment with both the training provider and the learner. So everybody actually signs up on day one to that agreement to say, right, what is going to be the best way forward in terms of us addressing, you know, any shortfalls that you've got in your training needs, or anything that you need in terms of your professional practice. How can we give you the opportunities to meet that need? And I think, as you rightly say, Adele, it's about that ongoing engagement with the employer, so you know at any one stage where that learner's at, because there's nothing worse than, you know, training provider coming in every 6 to 12 weeks doing a review and not engaging with that employer, but only having the conversation with the learner, because the learner then just thinks, well, I'm out on my own, there's nobody else to support me when the training provider's not around. And I think that's where the employer's got to take an active responsibility. In the time that the training provider is not around, they're engaging with the assessment plan, looking at the next stages, as Priya does. She always is one step ahead of the game in terms of what Jack needs in terms of achieving his qualification and standard. And I think the more employers that do that, the better opportunity that learner's going to have. Because, as I said during the presentation, I certainly see where there's been active engagement with both the learner and the employer, and I can really see the outcome and the grade that's been achieved by the learner. And more often than not, they will actually get, you know, a distinction in a large amount of their professional discussion, because they're able to link their actual working practice to the knowledge, skills and behaviours that sit inside the standard, whereas you get another learner that's not engaged with the employer, hasn't really had that amount of support as they've been going through the process, and they tend just to do rote. They just tell you what you've actually trained them as a training provider, and they give no rationale behind what they're actually doing in practice. And if you like, they perform like monkeys, because they just think, well, I put my disposable gloves and aprons on when I'm doing nappy changes because my manager told me to. They have no understanding that it links to health and safety, and all of those sorts of things that they need to be acutely aware of as they're working in the setting.
No, that's good. Priya, just a quick question for you. When you're doing your reviews with your tutor and your learner, what value do you get from that, and how do you kind of structure that?
Yeah, so I sit down with Jack every month or so, whenever we have an open door policy, so he can come to me at any time, and ask him whether he's happy, ask him whether he has any concerns or he needs help with anything. He's constantly asking me questions as part of his coursework. So I just make sure I make time for that, even if it's, 5 minutes every day. I just make sure I focus on that.
Brilliant. I was going to ask everybody if they wanted to unmic them, or maybe you can do that, Gal, unmute everybody. Just wanted to find out from other settings as well. There's a question just coming from Kate to say, how can settings ensure that apprentices are fully integrated into the team and feel valued for their contributions? Does anybody want to answer that? Or if we have any volunteers? Yeah, Priya, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so I think definitely offering them praise every single day. Just make sure they know what they're doing well. That really, really helps to boost their self-esteem. I think that's really important. And just giving them responsibilities, everything that you would do. Don't give them small basic tasks because you think they can't manage bigger ones. Make sure you give them the responsibilities that you have as well, and challenge them as well. So get them to, what I do with Jack is often I give him a risk assessment to do or another task, and then I'll check through it and see how much he knows, sorry.
Okay,
yeah,
brilliant.
And I think you're right, Priya, that it's about the employer asking questions on the hoof, really, to check that knowledge and understanding that sit inside the standards, because obviously when they get to the endpoint assessment stage, they're actually going to meet an external assessor who's going to be testing that knowledge and understanding. And I think if the employer is much more engaged with them and asking them questions, right, well, you've done that particular activity with that child, what sort of milestone does it link to? What sort of child development stage does it link to? What's the rationale behind you doing that activity with that particular child or group of children? It gives them the opportunity to actually practice and understand what questions are actually going to come to the fore when they're doing their endpoint assessment. So it should be an ongoing assessment process by both the training provider and the employer.
Definitely. I think talking to them whilst they're doing activities. So if he's set up an activity with a child who's doing something, I can then put in a comment or make a statement, and then it links into what he's already doing, rather than sitting him down and just talking to him. And also one thing I found with our Ofsted inspection, and the inspector really liked, which I have for Jack, is I've printed out cards from childcare.co.uk, and they're safeguarding cards with all the emergency details, what to do, who Lado are, who Masha. So this really helps Jack. He doesn't have to keep coming and asking me. He can just, if he forgets, he can just go to the cards and he can just have a flip and just remind himself. So little things like that I think really help.
Fantastic. Within these talks that the government is going to bring in £1,000 incentive for new learners or apprentices joining the sector later in this year, how do you feel this will actually help the sector? Do you think it will help the sector? Do you think it's a sticky plaster over a already underfunded sector? Anybody want to answer that, or do you guys think it will help?
From an awarding organisation point of view, I think, the incentive is really good, and I can see, the reason behind it, because as you say, we've got a real recruitment and retention crisis at the moment, both in early years and adult care. But I think also the government needs to do a piece of work around getting the understanding around apprenticeships for employers. And I think there's another piece of work that needs to be done before this incentive came into play to really drill down into the employer's understanding about the benefits of having an apprentice, because again, we do have large early years employers out there who could actually address their recruitment and retention needs through taking up a number of apprentices. But I think it's that basic understanding, it's the rationale behind why they need to take them on, what it actually involves in terms of working with an apprentice and the value and the benefits of having that. And I think if there was much more focus and some more media attention around that, I think the more opportunities we'd have for employers to engage and take up that bonus at a later stage.
No, definitely. Just want to touch on something that's quite interesting. Priya, you mentioned that you obviously have employed Jack, and that's something that we've been working on for many years to try and about our equality, to try and get more men into the sector, to try and promote that kind of diverse audience that children can get exposed to within the sector, because it's predominantly obviously female dominated. What was your rationale to do that? And, you know, what is the benefit, or is it, what are you finding this different to having, you know, you said you've had qualified staff before. You are on mute at the moment, Priya, just to let you know.
Hello, thanks for reminding me of that. I forgot I was on
Alright.
mute. So when I employed Jack, I wasn't actually looking specifically for a male, but I was absolutely thrilled, because I think children benefit so much from having that difference. Obviously, males and females are naturally different, so I think they benefit from that. And it takes the stigma away from the parents as well, from the families, because they see, oh, look how well he's doing. He's a male, and actually they get more comfortable and used to the idea, which is, I think that's great.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in terms of recruiting males into the workforce, as I said, I've been doing a piece of work with Busy Bees and Kids Planet, and I think one of the reasons that we found when we were doing that piece of work is it was around some of the titling of the jobs, because, you know, if you say early years practitioner, men think, oh, well, really, that's more of a female dominated role. You know, why should I go into that work? So what Busy Bees did, they actually went away and looked at their titling for some of their job roles within their nurseries, and they changed some of their roles and responsibilities into sports coaches. So they had much more, well, they had many more roles that had a particular focus on doing physical activities with children, and they found that increased applications for males, because just that change in titling opened up the doors for males to think, oh yeah, I could really do PE and activities with the kids in a setting. So yeah, I'm really interested in engaging with that job, and it really helped Kids Planet to actually take on more people, certainly males, to work in their settings, and they've gone from strength to strength. And they're actively recruiting more and more sports coaches now to work in their settings.
Brilliant. That's the thing, isn't it? Trying to get the kids active from a young age is brilliant. We should try and do that more. Gal, sorry, you put your hand up.
Yes, Mark, I just wanted to touch on that. You mentioned earlier about social media and becoming more active on social media to try and encourage more activity and engagement. Were there any particular platforms that worked that you find working better to do that?
I think, you know, obviously the piece of work that, if I just go back to the piece of work I've been doing with AHT around their hairdressing and beauty and holistic therapies, a lot of their learners obviously use TikTok, they use Instagram and all of those things. I mean, you know, Priya mentioned about looking for apprentices on LinkedIn. I don't think LinkedIn really is the right platform, because that tends to be more professional people who are already engaged in a career pathway, have career progression and so on. But I think it's looking at those social media platforms that we know young learners engage with. So Instagram, TikTok, all of those things, I think really is the, you know, the opportunity to shine a spotlight. You know, Jack would be an ideal influencer if he was to go onto Instagram or TikTok and talk about his experience. Encourage people to do that, the more likely people will actually become more engaged with it. As I say, the piece of work we're doing around schools at the moment, we're trying to make it much more snazzy when we go into schools and talk about, you know, it's a fantastic career. And I think it's about the way in which you sell that career to them, because people think, oh, early years and adult care, it's really boring. Well, it isn't when you drill down to it. You know, early years and adult care, there's fantastic career progression for people that are coming into the industry. And I think it's about singing, you know, the praises of early years and adult care in particular, and just making sure that the message is out there, certainly by young people who have been through that process themselves.
No, definitely.
Thank you.
We've just done a massive survey to all settings in England, and the results were actually quite shocking, to be fair, that actually 75% of settings are struggling to recruit staff members. you know, so and we were asking as well, part of the surveys, what people are doing to start to motivate their staff, and how often do settings actually have reviews with their existing staff. And 25% of settings have said they haven't had reviews with their staff in the last year. And you think, well, if you have a staff shortage and you can't recruit, the only way to keep your staff motivated is actually investing in your staff. But you've got funding available that you can invest in your staff to keep them motivated, keep them in your settings for much longer. So it's so frustrating that people don't use this resources available for them, you know. And I really urge settings who's listening to this webinar today and who's already on this call, but really think about how you can keep your existing staff for longer, so that we don't have that staff turnover. Because that's the other thing. A lot of settings have said they've lost over 10% of their workforce every year, and that's a lot of knowledge that you've invested in that staff member that goes lost, and you have to start again. So, you know, although an apprenticeship is for a defined period of time, you know, you are molding that person to be working within the way that you want them to work. And, you know, there's really value in that, because investing that time and then letting them go and employing someone else is like recycling, isn't it? So an apprentice can be for much longer than just that period for an apprenticeship wage that you are getting as a discounted rate, but you actually are getting a qualified staff member that, you know, if you've invested that time. Does anybody else have any questions, Mark, or is there anything else that you wanted to raise just in terms of what changes are coming? So do you think, as a training provider, obviously as a awarding organisation, what we are finding that a lot of people have just wanting that diploma currently. So I do think that will change the mindset, because really embedding that skills, knowledge and behaviour to actually get qualified for as a standard, that will help with the standardisation as well within the different sectors. So
yeah, I mean, obviously, yeah, I mean, with government departments, I mean, you know, whether we have a change of government or not in the next few months, I think certainly, you know, both parties, well, the two main parties have actually signed up to the fact that apprenticeships are here to stay and will be the key thing moving forwards for career progression for both young and adult learners. But I think in terms of regulation and certainly commission of services moving forwards, I think certainly there'll be an increased focus on those employers who do engage with apprenticeships much more moving forwards. And certainly when you're looking at, you know, trying to win contracts, trying to bring on new business as an early years employer, I think there'll be a real focus on whether you are engaged with apprenticeship programs and whether you actually truly are valuing the career progression of people that you're working with. I know, you know, doing the diplomas can be a quick fix. You know, there can be an opportunity to get people deemed competent as quickly as possible. But I think certainly with the revision of standards and the much more rigour that's been applied to the revision of those standards, I think there's going to be a lot more focus on the knowledge, skills and behaviours, and the fact that, you know, somebody coming out with an apprenticeship programme in the new world where there isn't a diploma and qualification, you're going to get excellent practitioners, because those knowledge, skills and behaviours, that observation by an external assessor will actually validate their opportunity to be a valid practitioner in the setting. And I think there's going to be a much more focus on that moving forward. So I think, you know, we're at the right stage now. I think we've got to start engaging much more with employers, get the messaging out there that apprenticeships are the way forward for people, and try and, you know, bang the drum as Priya's been doing. You know, Priya's had an excellent experience with the apprentice that she's taken on. And I think, you know, the more people like Priya that gets that message out there, and certainly, you know, people like Parenta, Kids Planet and Busy Bees I work with are always banging the drum about the value. It's not always about making money. It's about taking, you know, career pathways for young people seriously. And I think all the people, certainly I have the pleasure to engage with, really have that commitment. And I think that's the way that we need to go moving forwards.
Mark, just a quick question for you as well. Did you want to maybe update all the participants on the call today just about the maths qualification that now is the requirement for if you want to be a manager within the settings? I think it's important that people understand withdrawing your apprentice before they set the EPA. If they haven't achieved their maths and English, that means basically you are really stopping the progression.
You're setting them up to fail, because obviously if they do go forward for further careers, they will have to achieve their maths qualification. So it's in your best interest to do that as part of the apprenticeship programme. And I know, you know, we've still got the issue around the maths being one of the most difficult components of the apprenticeship programme. But just to make you aware, you know, I am starting to do a piece of work with the Department for Education and a number of early years providers, looking at how we can contextualise functional skills to particular settings moving forward. So certainly DFE have got a focus on early years at this moment in time, and also I'm trying to persuade them to look at adult care, because we see the value in actually contextualising the maths and English to what the learner actually does in practice. So if they're doing, you know, bottle feeds and then measuring out formula, that is one good way of testing whether people have actually got the knowledge and understanding around maths and understand, you know, ratios and all of those sorts of things. So I think in the long term, you know, there is a piece of work to be done around maths and English, and I think that's going to take a bit of time to actually get that embedded. Ofqual did a recent audit of all of the awarding organisations around functional skills papers, because of the point that employers were making that they just see functional skills so difficult for learners. And I have to say, Ofqual looked at everybody's papers across all awarding organisations to look at whether they actually were too difficult for learners. And in of course, professional opinion, they came back to say all of our papers had parity with one another and they were at the right level for the standards that we're currently working with. So I don't think functional skills and maths and English is ever going to go away. They're here to stay. I think, you know, in terms of moving forwards career-wise, I think we've just got to make sure that we enable those learners to get their functional skills as quickly as possible, and that we just don't, you know, allow them to fall by the wayside. Because certainly if you think about the revision of the apprenticeship standards moving forwards, there won't be a diploma. So unless that learner actually completes the endpoint assessment in full, they'll be walking away with no apprenticeship programme whatsoever. They will get nothing at all. They will have no recognition. And basically, they've wasted 18 months on programme.
It's 18 months on programme, but also if you think about it, it's a lot of money. £6,000 of funding for level 3, or 4,000 for, you know, and level 5 is £8,000 funding. There's a lot of money that has gone to waste if you haven't actually got that commitment from the start, you know. And I think you're right. What you're saying, Adele, I think what will happen, you know, as employers, and hopefully it won't happen, but if employers do start to disengage with apprenticeship programs and take people off program halfway through their course, I think questions are going to be asked not only by government department but also by Ofsted as to why that employer is not fulfilling the contract that they've signed with the training provider. Yeah. And again, I think it's all about this messaging and support and making sure that on day one, the employer's acutely aware of their roles and responsibilities and getting that learner to achieve their apprenticeship program. Yeah, and I think it's important as well that employees understand that once you've had that access to that funding and that funding's been drawn down, you cannot ever get that funding again. That's it. No. At that level, you cannot get that funding again. So actually, if your learner hasn't completed, if they do want to progress, they can't get that funding again. No. So that's going to have to be a self-funded. And as the diploma is falling away, the only way you're going to be able to do that is with a standard. So it becomes a bit of a, you know, quite contentious problem that you're going to have in the future where you're not going to be able to fund that. Mark, anything else on your side? Priya, anything from your side? Thanks so much, everybody. I was just going to quickly put in the chat. Please do join us next month on the 13th of March, which is all about sustainability, not just for the sector, but also for the industry, as well as our settings that's really struggling, what funding is available. We're going to be joined by Gina Sullivan next month, so do please join us for that. You should be able to register on parental.com/webinars for that registration later in this week. I wanted to say a special thank you to Mark, Childs and Priya. Thank you so much for all your time. And I know that everybody's busy and the settings who's joined us today as well. Thank you so much. And if you have any questions, obviously do reach out to Parental or any of the speakers today. I'm sure we'll be delighted to answer any questions if you couldn't ask that today. This recording will be on YouTube, so you can go watch it again. But don't forget to claim your free CPD certificate as well for attending today. Thanks, everybody, and have a fantastic day. Speak to you all soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.